This week we've brought the Antiques Roadshow across the stormy waters of the Pentland Firth to Orkney, a group of over 70 islands a few miles north of the Scottish coast at John o' Groats. Orkney is a landscape of wild, unspoilt beauty, varying from gently undulating countryside to cliffs that rise perpendicular to the sea. The Old Man of Hoy was once part of those cliffs, now eroded by the waves into dramatic isolation. Virtually everywhere you go on Orkney, there are reminders of earlier civilizations. The huge collective burial mound at Maze How and the standing stones of Stromness reflect a history of habitation going back at least 5,000 years. But in that long history, there is one event that stands out from all others, and it happened here at Scapa Flow. On Midsummer's Day in 1919, the entire German high seas fleet, which had been interned here since the end of the war, was scuttled on the orders of the German admiral so that his ships could not live again to fight in someone else's navy. In the Second World War, the British battleship HMS Royal Oak was torpedoed here in Scapa Flow by a German U-boat, which had slipped past the inadequate defences. More than 800 men drowned. On the orders of Winston Churchill, and as a direct result of that tragic loss, the very route taken by the German submarine was blocked off by an impressive causeway linking several of the islands together for the first time. The Churchill barriers, as they came to be called, were built by Italian prisoners of war, and on a low hill overlooking the water, in two old army Nissen huts, there's a tangible reminder of the years they spent incarcerated on Orkney. The men who built those Churchill barriers, the Italian prisoners of war, missed one thing as much as they missed Italy itself, and that was somewhere to worship. They had nowhere to celebrate Mass. So one day in 1943, a rather liberal and enlightened British commander said to them, "If I give you the tools, will you build your own chapel?" Well, the Italians readily agreed, and this was the result. Among the prisoners was an artist, Domenico Chiocchetti. Copying a holy picture in his wallet, he painted a mural of the Madonna and Child. The tabernacle was made from wood recovered from shipwrecks. The lanterns that lit the altar were fashioned from the prisoners' bully beef tins. Chiocchetti was so proud of his chapel that after the war he was invited to return to Orkney to lead its restoration. Well, coming into Stromness this morning is the P&O ferry from the Scottish coast, bringing with it dozens of people from Caithness who we've invited to be our guests today to swell the ranks of the Orcadians, the people of Orkney, who number some 20,000 and many of whom we hope are coming to the Stromness Academy, the local school, to meet our familiar team of Antiques Roadshow experts.
Do you know anything about them at all?
Not a lot. I think that they may have come out to a church or a chapel or something.
And how did you get them?
I just bought them here in Orkney.
Was it a long time ago?
It would be 30 or maybe over 30 or 40 years.
Did you pay a lot for them?
There was plenty, I suppose, maybe in teens of pounds, I would think.
Well, they come all the way from Italy.
Yes.
And they were made in a small place called Castelli d'Abruzzo.
I see.
In the 18th century. And at Castelli, they specialize in making these large tiles or plaques, painted with all sorts of subjects. And this one here...
I think it's Saul.
It is, that's right. It's a conversion of St. Paul, whose name was Saul until he became St. Paul. Yes. And there's God speaking to him out of the clouds, saying, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" Yes. In Latin. There he is falling over backwards, and his lovely horse, all that. And this one...
Well, this must be baby Jesus.
Yes, this is the Holy Family. Yes. Or what you call in art terms, the adoration of the Magi. Here are the three kings turning up. And as you can see, they've parked their camels behind.
That's right.
Now, the factory was dominated by two great families of painters. One of the families was called Grue, G-R-U-E, and the other was called Gentile. I think that these ones date from about 1740 and were probably painted by a man called Aurelio Grue.
I see.
And you could see this particularly by the amount of manganese or purple he used, and that's very typical of Aurelio Grue. This one, maybe a little later, because it's got rather more green in it. What's interesting is, as far as I can see, that's the original frame. That's an 18th century frame, which is a very good feature. Admittedly, somebody's stuck it together, but that's not a problem. And this one presumably has a frame.
I had a frame, it's lost.
Oh, what a pity. But without a frame, I would think that this one is worth between £2,000 and £3,000. And this one, which is bigger and a very active subject, between £4,000 and £5,000.
Thank you very much.
But they really are very exciting and amazing things to come all the way to Orkney to see.
Yes, and thank you very much.
Now this is a piece of furniture that you really can't ignore, because the crane and figure on the top of this table is really spectacular, isn't it?
It is lovely, yeah.
Now, do you have this table tilted upwards and in a corner so that you see the grain, or do you have it flat?
No,
like this?
It's in use every day.
It's in use every day. That's wonderful. Do you keep a cloth over it?
No.
No? Because the colour has also remained, and that's what part of the beauty, so that you get this wonderful, strong honey colour with the black marks running right the way through it, and it really is wild in this rosewood top to it. When I first saw the table, there was the quality that sprang out. Not only has it got this tremendous grain on the top, but if we can go down underneath and look at the pedestal. Now this also, I think, is really something to enjoy. I mean, I'm not sure you don't always get down on your knees like this and look at it.
Well, occasionally for dusting.
Occasionally for dusting. Well, it looks in beautiful condition here. And the generosity of all the forms, all the shapes. If you just run your hands around the pedestal here or over the legs and down to this extraordinary fleshy, leafy scrolls, which are quite prehensile, you feel they're going to come out at you. But all that is really a sign of quality, I think. You've got a really good table here. There are lots of these circular pedestal tables around. They are ubiquitous. In most rooms in 19th century houses you would have a circular pedestal table, but many of them are really of very little quality. This one I think is very, very fine indeed.
I had a cover on it, but I have got a husband who likes folks to see the grain.
It's very difficult, isn't it, to preserve it on one side and to enjoy it and see it on the other. If you keep it away from direct sunlight, then there's no real problem at all. I mean, are you interested in the market value at all?
Well,
would you rather not know?
We've had it. It's been in the family. It's my husband's aunt who originally had it, but when we got it, it was valued at £5.
£5?
Circular tables weren't popular.
No,
and that was about 40 years ago, I think.
Right. Well, now you'll be looking more in the region of £2,500 to £3,500. So worth looking at.
Thank you very much.
Well, it was a wedding present which we received from family friends who had travelled extensively in the East.
Yes.
He'd been the husband had been in the Indian Army.
It's amazing how much Oriental pottery and porcelain does actually get to all the seafaring nations up in northwest Europe. And I was hoping that we'd get quite a bit of Japanese here today. So here's one splendid piece of Satsuma ware. The nice thing about it is really its shape. If it were just a straightforward, round, ovoid shape, it would not be, I have to say, a terribly exciting piece. But the strength of the potting in producing this octagonal shape is what gives it its tremendous presence. Let's just start with the shoulder, where you see typical designs for Japanese and, in fact, also Chinese pottery and porcelain. The first is the phoenix, and if you then twist it round here, you'll see the companion dragon.
Yes.
The dragon is the male, and the phoenix is the female. But then going to the main body of the piece, what you have is, in fact, a rather charming outdoor scene with women and children basically just out of doors enjoying themselves.
And you always spot something new every time you look at it. There's a tremendous amount of detail in it.
You're absolutely right. When you think that even right down to the individual spots in the sky, I mean, those are done by hand. Everything is done by hand. And a vase like this typically would have taken maybe 3 weeks
Good heavens.
in total painting time. Then going into the base, there we see the Satsuma Mon. Incidentally, the Satsuma prince was, in fact, Christian at an early stage,
Yes.
which is why his own personal medallion incorporates the crucifix, the cross.
Yes.
And there you have the Potter's Mark, which I'm afraid is rather stylized. I can't read the first character. The second character says Zan. It could be Ryozan. I'm not sure. But anyway, there's one more salient point about this which affects its value. Do you know what that might be?
I haven't a clue.
It's condition.
Well,
If
we,
it were in-
we have looked after it, or tried to.
You've looked after it. Okay. Well, in that case, I have to ask you, how did this happen? Looking inside there.
I don't know. We only noticed that yesterday when we
Yes.
started cleaning it to take it here.
Yes.
Would that be a blow from the inside or the outside?
Almost certainly an impact of some sort just there has created a little star crack. It's probably not visible in the outside, but it is certainly visible on the inside. And it has a bearing on the value of the piece. It's quite close to another crack, which we can't see, which is called a firing crack.
Yes.
And that doesn't have any effect on the value at all.
Is it liable to get worse?
The star crack can get worse, but the firing crack is unlikely to get worse. That is the reason for it not really mattering.
Well, it's sat in the living room all our married life, and we tried to look after it, but, you know, with a family growing up, it's bound to have had knocks.
Yes. Well, it's imperfect, so it's only worth somewhere in the region of £1,000 to £1,500.
Amazing.
What started all this off? This cup and saucer. And where you got this from Granny?
No, I got that at the auction.
Bought this at auction?
Yeah.
Both the little miniature cups and saucers? Now, did you actually bid for them yourself? Shoved your hand up and bid?
I didn't have any money, so I asked my mum how much she was willing to pay, and then how much she said, then I just got it.
Oh, well, that's very brave. Many adults are scared to go and bid at an auction. They think they're going to have something knocked out of them like a clock, and they didn't bid, only scratch their nose. But you boldly went where many people fear to tread. That's jolly nice, you know, that's very nice. That's made by Minton, and it's a little toy cup and saucer for putting in a small cabinet. Not really for use, not for a child to play with, but it's hand-painted, and I think that's very beautiful. How much did you pay for these?
Well, I got that and that set
And the other cup and saucer, and the little glass hat.
something like £13 or something.
13, £13.
Yes,
Well,
that-
that is worth more than you gave for the lot. That's very, very beautiful. That's worth around about £30, £40. That's very, very nice.
What's this?
It's
got a squeak in it.
It's got the pepper and salt.
This is this is incredibly rare because these are made obviously useful for the blind. Because you want to know what you're putting on your.
You want to know how?
Well, when does it work?
I don't know.
How do you make that
Look,
squeak?
it's for children. It's to encourage children to use pepper. You
Oh,
see,
is that what it is?
that's what you do. You encourage children to use a lot of pepper.
There isn't
They're
one with the salt.
wonderful.
And so did your great-grandfather buy it, or
No, it was given to
him? Because J.G. Millet is famous in two different ways. First of all, he's the son of the most famous Pre-Raphaelite artist, Sir John Everett Millet. And he also wrote his father's biography. So people in the Pre-Raphaelite world know him as a biographer. And the second thing that he's so famous for is that he was a great birdman and wildfowler and illustrated a lot of books. And these are eider ducks. And this is a bird you see commonly up here.
Yeah, that's good.
Yes. As for price, it doesn't make a great deal, but I would have thought somewhere around £600 to £800, between 6 and 800.
Those are the binoculars. Anything else in there for us?
Yes, but just hold on.
These look like sort of Second World War issue.
Are they Second World War issue?
Well, they look fairly late to me. I would have thought they're 30s.
From where I can see, I think whoever did a sales job on binoculars in Orkney. Why is it everybody has a pair of binoculars in every house?
Because they're curious to see other
They want to see
people.
what their neighbours are
They're-
doing.
They live so far apart.
The spying and everything.
Oh, I see. I see.
They
I
like to
see.
see what they're doing.
So it's not actually marbling. I've been told off by Apostle for calling it marbling. And she said, you mustn't call it marbling, you must call it joggling.
Chocolate. Chocolate, yes. You joggle it together.
And it gives a
But
marvelous...
that's what you do every morning.
I do. I joggle every day. Religiously.
Well, it doesn't show.
Or irreligiously. It doesn't show. What I'm sad about that.
I'm sure it's been in the family for a long time. And
Well-
handed down,
Yes.
I would think.
The thing is that in design it's quite delicate. It doesn't look as if it would stand up to being used a great deal. It's got a really nice line to it here, with the back curling over. And of course the first thing one might say is, what do you think happened in the holes here? It could be that there were struts going down that might have been brass, or they could have been done in straw. But it's quite intriguing. I'm sure that there was some sort of panel filled in at the back, which would have made it a bit more comfortable. Then you've got this Greek key design, which is this motive along here. And I think it's always had a cushion, a squab cushion like this, because if you take this off, you'll see that this rattan seat wouldn't have been very strong to sit on. And the fact that it's got quite a deep side here shows that the seat cushion would have been there, and then it would have made it level with the seat. And then going down to the legs here, it's got a really nice sweep down to this poor foot. But what's particularly nice is if you look here at the back, you've got this sort of furry bit that goes right down to the foot.
Yeah.
And this was a leg that you found at the end of the 18th century, and then it was still used into the beginning of the 19th century. And the whole influence of the chair is a sort of Egyptian, Roman, Greek, which was very popular at the beginning of the 19th century. The chair is made in mahogany, but there are some darker bits of mahogany as well.
Yes.
And I think that that was done to give an impression of bronzing, which was also very fashionable at the time. And the value, about £500. So it's a super chair. Thank you very much for bringing it.
Well, thank you for telling me about it.
It's the most distinguished order of St. Michael and George. It's one of our higher orders that we have in this country. You tell me a little bit about the background.
Well, I really know no background other than I sold a coin, half crown, for about £20.
Really?
And I was asked to take this in exchange.
Really?
So that was its origin, as far as I know.
Well,
so I know nothing else.
it's a wonderful find for you. It really is. Now, let me tell you what you have here. You have the collar of the order, which they would wear completely around their neck with this in front here. You have the breast badge, which would be worn here. And then you have the sash badge. The sash goes around the shoulder. And this is supported by the sash in that manner. Have you any idea, have you any conception of how much it's worth?
I haven't a clue.
Well, you have here in toto something in excess of £3,000.
What?
£3,000. So I think you did very, very well in your exchange.
Do you have a collection of dolls?
My mother had. Well, since this one was bought, she has made a collection of dolls.
That's
This was
wonderful.
the first one.
Presumably it was bought in Scotland.
Yes, in Edinburgh.
She has a very unfortunate name that she's known by, this type of doll, which is a slit head, which is very unfortunate because I think they're one of the most charming of the waxed dolls. The slit head is because the wig was inserted in the top of the crown. It was quite an easy way of putting on a wig instead of inserting each individual hair, which they did with later wax dolls. This, in fact, is not a full wax. It is called a wax over papier-mâché, so that they had a base on which to build the wax form. Her body is made of a rather rough, it's probably a rough sort of kapok style, but obviously not kapok in those days. It would have been rags all stuffed together and very firm, really. And this would have been made in the 1840s, as early as that in England, and generally in excellent condition in the original clothes. And a doll at auction today in this condition I can see making between £500 and £700.
How did you get it?
Well, it's always been out in the family as far long as I know. I've sort of had it on the mantelpiece. And I've really not thought much about it, I'm afraid.
You know, a lot of the best and earliest pieces of porcelain have no mark on them. And therefore, you would
They
say...
haven't got any marks.
No. Therefore, you would say, how the goodness do I know where it comes from?
Yes, yes.
Well, here we have a porcelain box. And when you look at it, it's got sort of Rococo scrolls in relief around the border here, and they go on each side.
Yeah.
So that's one hint about the date. It was made in the 1740s. This is made of a very hard white porcelain. So it's a German porcelain. Now, fortunately, there was only one factory really making boxes at that time, and that was the Meissen factory. Like all Meissen boxes of the period, it has two things happen inside. One, the interior of the body is gilt entirely, and two, the inside of the lid is beautifully painted. Now these are actually stippled, and you have to imagine the artist painting there with a feather and a magnifying glass, putting on each little spot of colour one at a time. And the mount is the original mount. There's only one unfortunate thing that's happened with your mount, and that is, if you look very carefully inside, you will see that there are traces of gilding. And this silver mount was originally a silver gilt mount. That's not a serious problem. What, of course, is a problem is what's happened here, where it has been broken.
I didn't do it.
You're not guilty, no. Well, it happened before you...
Yes.
I think that one could have this tidied up quite efficiently and not at great cost.
Yeah.
A box like this in perfect condition is worth £5,000, £6,000 or £7,000. In this condition, well, it's lost a lot. But it's still, I think, worth well over £1,000. And if we had it cleaned up nicely, I think it'd be well worth doing. But it is a very exciting and remarkable thing to see.
Thank you very much.
Your father would have got this from Stanley Cursiter.
Yes, he definitely did, because in the firm they used to do a lot of framing of his pictures, and he got that one. In fact, there was one or two more in the family, but that was the one that came my way.
Because Stanley Cursiter is really Orkney's most famous son as an artist.
That's
certainly.
right.
And this must have been done as a teenager.
Yes, definitely.
Which would make it about 1907, 1905, 1907?
Yes, about that time.
It's slightly crudely painted, but it's a marvellously evocative view of Kirkwall. Well, it's interesting because it's full of all the life which the young Cursiter knew, and then he went down to Scotland and not only became a very famous painter, but also the Queen's limner for Scotland,
That's right,
the Queen's painter for Scotland. And then he came back to Orkney and spent really the rest of his life here, didn't he?
Yes, he did. Yes, he retired here.
Well, this picture, I think, is a slightly one-off, but of tremendous interest to people here, and as such, I'd value it probably in the region of £1,000, £1,500.
Yes.
Well, now we leave the people of Stromness and our experts just for a moment for me to tell you about the Radio Times competition and, of course, to remind you that every week you stand a chance of winning a voucher which can then be exchanged for £2,500 worth of antiques. So it really is well worth having a go. First, however, the answer to last week's question. We asked you to name the decorative technique used on this Pembroke table, and the answer is parquetry. This is a technique in which pieces of wood are laid onto the carcass of the furniture in geometric designs. Well, now to this week's competition object, and here it is. This very pretty little bodkin case is a marvellous example of fine 18th century craftsmanship. It was made to carry a lady's bodkins or needles, but is much more extravagant, really, than that simple task would suggest. The lid and the cylindrical body fit very snugly together. They're mounted in gold, and it's smothered all over in this most marvellous, colourful decoration of exotic birds sitting amid the branches of the trees. This lustrous bronze background colour is very reminiscent of Oriental lacquer, and that gives you some clue as to the decorative technique used. The Europeans were great admirers of Oriental skills in lacquering, and they made many attempts at imitating it. This was one of the most successful. And so, to the question, what is this decorative technique called? Now, to help you, it's probably a good idea to look at a copy of the new Radio Times, which gives you not only more details of the competition, but even goes so far as to suggest a few possible answers. And then your entry, please, needs to be postmarked before next Saturday and addressed to the Radio Times rather than to the Antiques Roadshow. I'll be setting another question next week and also, of course, providing the answer to this week's competition. In the meantime, now, back to the people of Orkney and our experts.
Well, obviously, this is a piece of Weems pottery from Scotland.
Well,
of course, it's a super piece, this one. You like it, do you?
Yes, I do.
I love these cockerels. I think they're absolutely marvellous. They strut around in the grass there, and these gorgeous green colours, I think, which are very, very romantic. Now, of course, got very popular, but it was very popular around about 1900 to the 1920s, when it was bought, of course, by very famous London people, including, I suppose, the greatest collector of the lot, the Queen Mother, who has a very fine collection. And interestingly, this has the mark of the Royal China dealers, Thomas Good, here. They specialised in the sale of Weems from, even before 1900. So that's almost a guarantee that it is a great piece of Weems. I like it very much. They are getting highly collectible, especially a good piece of early Weems like this. I suppose one's got to think in terms of perhaps £1,500 for it.
This is the oval brass watch, the earliest watch that you have.
Earliest one, yes.
One of the earliest watches one's likely to find. It's had a very hard life, I'm afraid. The movement's been changed, and some bits are missing from the side of the case, but you can see from the dial and the engraving of the dial surround and the shape, the oval shape, that it was the first period. They were actually sometimes called as Nuremberg eggs. Yeah. This would be an exceptionally valuable watch if it was still in perfect condition. Yeah. Many thousands of pounds, but it's now something more really of a museum piece, and in view of the condition. And the next one here, this is made in Switzerland in about 1900 or so, and they were made as something of a gimmick, but they were quite popular. And in fact, you can see right through the dial. It appears that there's no dial at all, but it has the hands, and it actually works. If one opens the back up, there's a small compartment for the movement, and you can actually see that the movement's tucked away in the top.
Yes,
and
the top part, yeah.
Put some ring of teeth around the edge of the glass in the middle, which turned the hands. It's a clever idea. Unfortunately, one of the glasses is cracked, but
right, yes,
it could be replaced.
I remember that, yeah.
Yeah. These, you used to find these very easily. Now they're worth about £750.
Yeah, I didn't know.
They were in a portfolio inherited by my grandfather in Northumberland.
Yes. Was he something to do with the China trade? Or?
No, he was a lawyer.
Right.
And this was an artist friend, I presume.
Yes. Well, I must say they're two particularly charming watercolours, and the first one, as we can see here, is entitled Habitation of a Mandarin. And there's a rather nice inscription underneath. And this is particularly nice because I'm sure it's in the artist's handwriting, so it would be contemporary with the watercolour. Yes. The other one is, I would have thought, is probably a pleasure boat of some rich, maybe Mandarin trader. And it's obviously not a working boat because it has lovely decoration. You can see the dragons here.
Yes, yes.
And the lovely painted panels. But coming back to this one here, many of these sort of watercolours, painted around 1840, that sort of thing, are views on the Pearl River in China. And I think that's most likely where this is. Have you ever thought of an artist for it at all, or have you ever been told who it might be by?
I was out in Hong Kong and I went to Macau,
yes,
where Chinnery lived and painted.
Yes.
And we've always wondered if
perhaps they're by Chinnery, yes. Well, I think that's a very good name. I mean, Chinnery was a very influential artist, and he did go out there, you're quite correct. And these are very similar to George Chinnery, and stylistically, and the colouring and the drawing, but I feel they're not quite his hand. And in fact, we have a bit of a clue here, because there appears to be a monogram, which is slightly illegible, but looks to be HC. Well, I must be honest, I'm not familiar with this name, HC. But the thing is, there were so many artists who went out to China, especially from 1839 to 1842, when the first Opium War took place.
Yes.
And a lot of naval and military people went out there. And in fact, a lot of the naval people were officially trained at Dartmouth to draw. It was one of the things, part of their training. And the reason for this was in order to record fortifications, because of course in those days they didn't have sophisticated cameras. And that's why in idle moments, when they had nothing better to do, they'd do these delightful little drawings and sketches.
Yes.
Have you ever thought in terms of valuation at all? Do you have any idea what they might be worth?
No, not at all.
Obviously, if you could find out who they're by, they'd be worth a little bit more. But let's be conservative. Let's say that this one here is probably worth somewhere in the region of £800 to £1,200. So I'd probably insure it for about £1,200.
Yes.
And I think this one, probably a little bit less, is probably in the region of £500 to £700.
Yes,
but I must say, I think they're particularly nice, and
very interesting.
I like them very much.
Yes. Terribly pleased to know all that.
In the late 1840s in France, there were 3 great glass houses that made paperweights. And they were called Baccarat, Saint-Louis, and Clichy. And 2 of them, certainly, Baccarat and Saint-Louis, made this kind of weight, which is called a mushroom weight, because you see you've got a sort of mushroom-shaped basket of what are called canes in the middle. Now, most of the ones that have blue bands like this are Baccarat, but I have a doubt in my mind here, because when you look at this one, there's a tremendous amount of sort of salmony orange, isn't there, which you don't normally find at Baccarat, and I think that this may well be a St. Louis one. It has a little problem there. That's called a bruise there.
It was dropped 30 years ago.
Yeah, and that's a pity.
Yeah.
Commercially, it might affect it for a few pounds. But what would you think something like that could be worth?
I have no idea.
Well, I think that we are actually talking of something between £600 and £1,000.
I didn't think it would be that much.
Yeah.
You'd never believe that an object as tall and as complex as this would actually be used to hold a watch, which is in the middle. Now, where on earth did it come from?
Edinburgh.
And under what circumstances? I mean, did you fall across it, or...?
No, I saw it on my holidays and I went back to buy it about a week later.
Why didn't you buy it at the time?
Because I didn't rate it. It was too dear.
Well, she's wonderful, isn't she? Perhaps the best thing to do is to start with the watch itself, because that's the essence of the whole piece. And this is a paired verge watch, and a normal verge watch like this would be worth perhaps £150. But this is fantastic, with a picture of Wellington on it. And that's what this wonderful edifice is. It's basically a watch stand. But if we look at what it's made of, first of all, at the top, the lady is made of ivory. Now, that may be marine ivory rather than elephant ivory. Coming down, she's standing on this wonderful sort of altar, if you like, made of bone. Further down still, you've got... This looks as though it could even be cedar wood. I'm not sure about the wood that's making the main frame. And then at the bottom here, again, more bone carving. And I'm looking at this, and I'm wondering whether it's prisoner of war work, is it scrimshaw work? I'm going to really stick my neck out here and say that it could be scrimshaw work, because there you'd have the absolute mix between whale ivory in the teeth and whale bone, which we've got a lot of here. The wood could have been found on board ship. Have you had any thoughts on it yourself?
No, I thought it was prisoner of war work, that's all.
The only thing I would say about prisoner of war work is that you don't tend to see that sort of use of ivory, and in such large chunks, if you like. You'd have ivory in small pieces, but that's quite a decent chunk of ivory that she's been carved from. I'm sure somebody somewhere is going to say, well, I think that it's prisoner of war work, somebody else is going to think it's scrimshaw. I'm torn between the two, I really am. I can't say positively. What I can say is that the watch itself is dating from about 1825. That would then date the piece to sometime around or perhaps just after that, assuming that the watch had always been with it, which I don't think is unlikely. And I'm going to ask you what you paid for it. How long ago was it?
20 years since. I paid too much for it.
Well, how much?
200 quid.
200 quid 20 years ago. Well, I can see why it wasn't a snap decision.
Yeah.
I would have said that we're talking about something in excess of 3,000 now.
You're joking. You've got to be.
Well, my father-in-law bought the house we have about in the early 50s, and the previous family removed all their paintings, and he needed something for the wall of the dining room, and he had a friend who was an auctioneer in Aberdeen, and I'm not really sure whether the friend gifted him this picture or whether he bought it.
So it doesn't go very far back. I mean, actually, it's not a terribly old picture. It's painted after the turn of the century. In fact, the most interesting thing about this picture is not the artist, in fact, but what it does, it reflects the taste of the period just after the turn of the century, say from 1910 to 20, where there was an enormous interest and love of old master paintings. And this face, if you like, reflects that period of art. The artist himself is an Edinburgh artist, and is best known not for this sort of painting, but for sort of rather beautiful mythological illustrations. It's a nice quality painting, and I think probably we should value it for insurance, say, at £8,000.
My goodness, that is a great surprise.
What I'd like to know straight away is how a piece from India or China comes to be in Orkney.
Well, all I know about the piece of furniture really is it originally came from the Castle of May.
So that suggests that there have been perhaps some colonial interests behind the provenance of this
I believe
piece.
so, yes.
What I think is most spectacular about this piece of furniture, apart from its weight, which we can't demonstrate, is an extremely heavy piece made out of East Indian rosewood, is this extraordinary rippling effect across the facade here. And this really shows some European influence. The whole form of the piece is something like an English slant front bureau, but this ripple effect across the front shows a distinctly Dutch influence. And the Dutch and the British, of course, traded in the Far East, and many of the pieces that were made in the Far East took up certain aspects of European design. There's an interesting configuration of drawers. You can see there's one long drawer above two short drawers, and then two long drawers again, which is not a very European feature.
I see.
The handles, I think, are very nice here. You have this quite heavy swan-necked handle with the pierced back plates and a scutcheon here. But these are quite thin, but that is fairly characteristic of pieces that were imported from the Far East. And if we can, wonderfully heavy, if you could perhaps pull out your, that's right, and inside you get the full beauty of the unfaded colour of this East Indian rosewood. If we move through, we can see that it has this European arrangement of pigeonholes. It's got a document drawer here. It's had the hinges replaced at some point.
Yes,
it doesn't matter too much. I think the weight of this full front has necessitated the replacing of the hinges. And then you can see that the ripple effect of the front is repeated in these lovely, again, rosewood drawers. So this is really a piece, I think, of extraordinary quality. Do you have it separately insured?
No, we don't actually know. Not
Well,
that I know of.
I think it might be worthwhile because something of this sort might well fetch between £6,000–8,000 in an auction.
Good grief.
I think because we're surrounded with water, I was expecting to see quite a lot of instruments up here, but when you brought this in and it was a German chronometer, I thought to myself, oh, that's slightly old, but then I realised that the fleet actually scuttled itself here in 1919. Did this come from down through your family? Or?
Yeah, it did, yeah.
So I will lay a bet that this came off one of the ships, because it's just the sort of instrument they'd have had. Now, it's a marine chronometer, It's actually made by a kettle of Altona, and Altona was the centre in Germany where they tested a lot of chronometers. And we've got, actually in the lid here, we have a label for Tietz of Kiel. He would have been the chandler or the supplier and regulator of the piece to the German Navy. There's something particularly interesting about this instrument. Well, let's have a look inside, because it's actually got, here we are, they're a real puzzle to get out of the box. Okay. Now, if we look at the balance wheel here, you can actually see that it's like two balance wheels. The first one is the standard rim, and then you've got these little tiny miniature balance wheels on both sides of the balance itself. And they are for what is called middle temperature compensation. They correct for small differences in temperature change in the middle of the temperature range. The extremes will be taken care of by the large balance expanding and contracting, and the small ones will take care of minor differences. And it is an extremely rare feature. And the other interesting point about this instrument is that it has a pivoted detonate escapement. Now, chronometer escapement or detonate escapement is the type of escapement that was used for all marine instruments. And this one has a pivoted escapement, which is most unlike German work of this time. As a unique instrument, and with a history of coming quite surely off the fleet, one of the fleet ships here before they scuttled, I would think that we'd certainly be looking at something between £5,000 and £10,000. I think it's quite glad it didn't go down on the ship.
Exactly, yeah.
Well, at the end of last week's programme, you may remember I was speculating on exactly what we might find here in Orkney, and indeed how many people would turn up, because obviously there's a limited population. Well, we've been more than satisfied on every conceivable count. Indeed, one man from Stromness was saying to me earlier he thought we'd seen roughly half the population of the islands here today. It certainly felt like it. And even our treasure trove has turned up during the day in various forms as well. This, for instance, a stoneware pot that was recovered from the wreck of the German battle cruiser Hindenburg, which was scuttled with the rest of the ships out in Scapa Flow in 1919. And we've seen so many of these, too, Orkney's chairs. And a lot of them are subtly different because they were made by individual crofters who all had their own ideas on how the design of the chair should be practically put together. So our warm thanks to the people of Orkney, and indeed those who joined us today from across the water on the north coast of Scotland. They're now on their way back to Caithness. We're on our way now to Lancashire, and I particularly hope you'll join us next week at the same time, because that will be the last programme in the current series of the Antiques Roadshow. So until then, from all of us here in Orkney, goodbye.